Are these first 2 races causing you any distress? Although I'm not pleased with the team, I am not pleased with the outcome. It happened on May 1, 1994. There was a sense of horror in the air over Imola that no one could describe. A large throng watched in anxious quiet as the sun sank over the Italian track. Sitting in his Williams FW16, Ayrton Senna had his visor and helmet down. His hands on the steering wheel were trembling just a little. He uttered something that Formula One would never forget, and that was just 24 hours ago. Certain things are beyond our control. You will be completely chilled by what transpired next. It was a final act of defiance, a final decision. The tense victor, Senna, wasn't merely quick. He refused to give up. Before entering Formula One in 1984, he began racing in Formula Ford, Formula 3, and karts. In 1960, he was born in São Paulo. By 1991, he had earned 3 world championships with McLaren. Renowned for tolerating rain so well that they gave the impression that rivals were still. But he was never content with prizes. Manage. His true treasure was that narrow line where the car and response joined. Senna departed McLaren for Williams after the FW16 won consecutive championships in 1994, when regulations changed to exclude traction control and active suspension. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. And hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Now, back to the topic. What we were talking about was, the move appeared to give them strength on paper. It raised questions in real life. The chassis was no longer able to conceal the concealed defects in the prohibited circuits. A vehicle that could revolve around its rear axle like a trapdoor was discovered during winter testing. A few settings were altered by engineers. Senna continued to spin. We've seized the opportunity to get this new vehicle and return to the passive rules. Hey. He still won first place in Brazil and Japan in spite of this. Evidence that both races quit despite the fact that talent is fighting physics. The grimace that was visible during interviews deepened with each DNF. He claimed that the FIA was more concerned with entertaining than with ensuring public safety. He questioned whether Benetton's rapid speed was actually permitted. He swaggered, but he was really afraid, result of crazy politics and bad behavior by some. Friends saw the shift. Normally gregarious, Senna turned nasty and sat alone with telemetry information in the evenings. The word that was on his lips was balance, which was not something that the FW16 frequently provided. Using adjectives he wouldn't typically use to describe an automobile, he told mechanic David Brown that the back felt stiff and the steering seemed dead. If he was growing increasingly dissatisfied, why did he continue to drive? The answer is found in his obligation to his own moral code, to the sponsors who covered the cost of his return flight, and to the millions of Brazilians who woke up early to watch him. Champions overcome adversity rather than flee it. All the way to Imola for the 3rd race, he was under stress. A machine that spoke deceit, an unsettled country, and 2 incomplete races set the scenario. Senna appeared fearfully and with considerable talent. A distinction that unnerved colleagues. The risk had always been molded to the winner's preference. For the first time, risk was reversing course. The difference was narrowing as each news session turned into a vote on whether intuition could triumph over skepticism. Senna was aware of this, but he persisted because he was certain that he had to win for both Brazil and himself. When the car turned into the adversary, the stress would soon cause the final words that still chill you. Typically, Ayrton Senna thought of machinery as an extension of his will and nerve. I had the impression that I could defeat the Williams FW16. The computer aids that had maintained the stability of the earlier models were eliminated during the 1994 regulation purge. All that remained was a chassis with tight windows that penalized deviation from perfection. It was evident from Estoril's first winter test that the FW16 had issues. The back wheels stepped out when the power was applied, the steering felt unsatisfactory, and it oversteered rapidly in the middle of a turn. It was unusual for Senna to turn twice in one morning. Nothing was obvious to the engineers. The aerodynamics, which no longer have active sensors, were designed with balance problems in mind. Senna had a notebook full of notes about tire pressures, wing angles, damper curves, and ride height settings when he arrived in Imola. The practice times appeared to be suitable. Even after the truth was revealed on the air, he insisted that he was only a temporary pole. He whispered, "Rear is alive again," on Friday. Each complaint ended with helpful advice, such as, change bar, raise nose, soften springs. Front won't talk to me. After that, Rubens Barrichello's character Jordan performed a flip at Variante Bassa. Senna's mouth tightened as he hurried to the medical clinic. It was a new reminder of how frail flesh is when it meets metal, despite the fact that his young protégé survived. Upon returning to the workshop, he made a double check of the steering nuts. The car was still misbehaving on Saturday morning, but Senna applied more pressure. "I don't know much about it, so I need to go to." In second qualifying, he passed Villeneuve at 138 miles per hour before heading into the pits to check the numbers. During his qualifying lap at 190 miles per hour, Roland Ratzenberger's front wing broke a few minutes later. At Villeneuve, the Simtech immediately killed the 33-year-old guy by driving straight through the concrete. Senna arrived by the side of the track, removed his helmet, and gazed with tears in his eyes. Motorsport can be cruel. Too cruel, he sobbed in the garage while addressing team manager Joe Ramirez. He had warned the FIA that if electronics were banned without track reform, speed and safety would become less compatible. There was evidence on the ground now. Returning to his pit, he watched the playback in somber silence before requesting revised steering rack measurements and tire temperatures, as if improving the FW16 more could still prevent disasters. The driver's relationship with the vehicle was deteriorating. With each lap, you had to have trust that the tires, which had been cooled by safety car stops, would bite, the steering column would remain in position, and the aero balance wouldn't shift in the middle of a turn. Faith is a risky transaction when things are happening so quickly. But there was nothing Senna could do. He told Dr. Sid Watkins that evening, "We'll keep going if we find answers tomorrow." However, the most crucial question remained unanswered: was the FW16 really safe? Senna believed it was his responsibility to exert control over uncontrollable forces. Duty became fate as dawn broke. Imola in the nighttime hours. The San Marino Grand Prix weekend unfolded slowly, like a nightmare. The horrible incident on Friday, the death on Saturday, and the tension on Sunday. Each deed is more sinister than the one before it. By race morning, Imola felt more like a countdown clock than a sports website. The incidents on the list were quite depressing, and they weren't finished yet. Rubens Barrichello struck a curb at Variante Bassa on Friday, April 29th, launched, and into the barrier with 95 g. He said, "Aware of the challenge we face in order to get back on track." On April 30th, Roland Ratzenberger lost his life in an accident in the same complex. Another crash occurred during warm-up on May 1st. 7 people were injured when Pedro Lamy and JJ Leto collided, sending flying items into the crowd. Senna watched the cleaning from the pit wall, his helmet under his arm, and he showed no signs of being upset. However, it was clear that he was afraid. As if understanding how one tragedy occurred could prevent another, mechanists recall that Ayrton Senna, dressed in his racing overalls, spent the evening of April 30th alone in the Williams RV, watching Roland Ratzenberger's crash footage repeatedly, frame by frame, in search of a technical clue. But there was simply silence on the tape. That evening, Senna called his sister Vivian in Brazil to let her know how depressed and angry he was. For the first time, he mentioned that Imola might be his final race in Europe if safety conditions don't improve. Dr. Sid Watkins arrived shortly after, carrying a bottle of wine. Senna was the first time Watkins had witnessed history being made. It was usually following a collision. "Please step away now," the surgeon said, "enjoy the life you've earned." Senna glanced at the floor before telling the doctor what he would say in closing: "You don't have anything left to prove. Why don't we both quit?" "I can't give up," I told Sid. "There are some things we can't change. I must continue." Senna acknowledged that control had its limits when she said, "The sentence was cold and almost impersonal, and it sent 3 signals that still chill you to the bone." Saying they had no control was unheard of for a driver whose duty it was to utilize every variable they could manage, such as brake bias, tire temperature, and fuel load. Second, he stated that responsibility, not desire, guided the decision. Whether it was to Brazil, my sponsors, or a deep-rooted code that prioritized daring over life, I have to and meant that I had to. Third, it was stated less than 18 hours prior to his death at Tamburello. It sounds as though he wrote a death notice for himself. Imola's dark hours compressed 48 hours of terror into a single day. The champion who once made speed seem like a divine attribute now had to contend with mortality, rule changes, and technical uncertainty. Could he still alter his destiny? Was the only question that kept coming up. 1 lap later, the response is really frightening. There was a lot of tension when the race went green again on the 6th lap. In a minute, it would shatter. Something's are out of our hands. Watkins wrote about his conversation with Senna in the Williams motorhome in his book, which was written many years later. The doctor offered them one final option: they could skip the race, take a plane home, and go fishing. I saw real fear in Ayrton's eyes for the first time. I couldn't get him to not drive, so I had to accept it. But Senna just shook his head no. The conversation had ended. Both men understood its significance. No more altercations. Not much more persuasive. The commitment threshold, or the moment at which risk ceases to be a deterrent and instead becomes a sign of fate, is discovered by psychologists studying high-risk sportsmen. It had been reviewed by the Senna. But he still had 1 race to go. After reviewing the information, he adjusted the steering input and requested that engineers stiffen the rear anti-roll bar for the remainder of the evening, restoring security in small ways. 10 p.m. He left the track and proceeded to the Castello Hotel. He had a light meal, read a little of the Gospel of John, and then had a restless night, according to the hotel staff. He carefully connected the belts the following day on the grid and, as a gift for Ratzenberger's family in the event that he won, tucked a Brazilian flag into the cabin. The warm-up in the morning did not improve his mood. Over the radio, he reported that the car still pulls on turn-in. To improve comfort, the team modified the steering column and created an 8mm gap. Mechanics later claimed that it had small cracks in it prior to the race. Courts would debate whether or not that change was the cause of the collision for years, but Senna simply nodded, buckled in, and rolled to the grid at that very moment. He did not appear to be an imminently dying man. It wasn't until Watkins told the police about his private final remarks following the accident that the media heard them. Everyone froze after they went public. Proud drivers of 700 horsepower rockets began to question what they couldn't control. Wing detachments, suspension failures, and ruthless debris angles with millimeter scales. Senna's actions were perceived as the final deed of a guy who understood his limits yet continued to race, rather than the downfall of a valiant hero. He knew there was a line, and he crossed it. After over 30 years, it's that unclouded, rational, and unambiguous understanding that still chills you to the bone. The actual race, which lasted 12 minutes, would alter the future of Formula One safety. Lap 7 to 12. 8 seconds to always. There was a cloud over the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, both literally and figuratively. 2 p.m. The lights went off. The group was led into Tamburello by Ayrton Senna. Confusion immediately broke out behind him. Pedro Lamy struck J.J. Leto when he stopped on the grid, scattering debris into the crowd and injuring people. The safety car was utilized for 5 laps. The Opel Vectra pace car, which Senna later said was moving too slowly, was followed by the other drivers. Tire pressures decreased as a result of the race's cooling temperatures. From the driver's seat, Senna gave frantic signals to the cars, telling them to accelerate so that their tires and brakes might heat up. He was obviously concerned. In these weather, racing at high speeds was not safe. When the safety car entered and the race resumed, Senna was ahead of the other competitors. Benetton, led by Michael Schumacher, closed the distance in the background. On lap 7, the vehicle abruptly skidded off the road as Senna approached the flat-out Tamburello left-hander. Just 12. After 8 seconds, everything collapsed. The Williams FW16 left the race line at roughly 191 miles per hour. Telemetry would later reveal that Senna depressed the brakes and released the throttle. His struggle with the steering wheel lasted only a moment or two. The automobile skimmed across the grass at around 130 miles per hour and struck the concrete wall with force. It had a horrible effect. A section of the right front suspension was driven back into the front seat by someone. A titanium pushrod passed through Senna's helmet, slightly over his right eye. The automobile broke into pieces as it slowed to a stop and rebounded back onto the track at the same moment. At the end of the track, the red and white Williams came to a stop. It was broken and silent. First to arrive were the marshals. Senna's head was slumped to the side, but his helmet remained in place. In just a few seconds, the rescue personnel reached him. It was a depressing scene. The visor was blood-stained, and his face was severely injured. Nevertheless, they moved swiftly to remove his helmet, stabilize his neck, and prepare him for evacuation. After speaking with Senna the previous evening, Dr. Sid Watkins arrived at the accident scene and immediately assessed the severity of the injuries. Near the track, he performed a tracheotomy. Once more, there was a slight heartbeat, but neither the brain nor the spinal cord responded. The arrival of a medical helicopter on the track stunned and silenced everyone on the planet. Senna was transported by air to Bologna's Maggiore Hospital. Commentators remained wary. There was a slim possibility that he may survive. But for those who witnessed it, the outcome was already evident. Senna was helpless in a machine he couldn't operate, which was exactly how his battle ended. By the time the race resumed, many in the pits were already bracing themselves for the worst, a point of contention to this day. And for millions of viewers worldwide, the image of Senna's motionless car at Tamburello came to symbolize a generation. Because he was unable to finish, he passed us in the slow turn, making it impossible to catch up. Although the crash only lasted a few seconds, the consequences will persist for decades. No motor that has ever been used in a race could compete with the silence. On the line, there is stillness. Because it was so peaceful afterward, rather than because it was noisy or violent, those who watch motorsport will never forget what happened at Tamburello that day. The fast-paced, loud sport known as Formula One was shut down. And it was frightening to hear nothing. "This is disturbing," muttered others from the stands, unsure whether they should stay to watch what was happening. Ayrton Senna's helicopter left the track, and the race continued. Something had changed as people watched. Drivers' eyes darted to the side as they circled the debris lap after lap. Mechanics in the pit lane gazed at the ground instead of their screens. Commentators were at a loss for words. Around the world, people waited, but few had the courage to express what many already thought aloud. Many people in the sport are still baffled as to why the race was continued. Watching the video was frightening. Senna's normally moving head was motionless. Although medical personnel shielded his face from the cameras, brief shots revealed the extent of his injuries. His cabin had a pool of blood at the bottom. Senna's body made what appeared to be its final uncontrollable movement, a flick of the head, a death indication of life, just before Watkins arrived at the car. This was the one extremely unsettling moment that witnesses will never forget. Although it was most likely only a reflex, it briefly gave us hope. "I realized then that we had lost him," and Dr. Watkins would later state harshly that what he observed was accurate. He sighed, and his body relaxed. This is distressing because of what was depicted, not because of the graphic film. In a moment, a man who was believed to be unbeatable, controlled, prepared, and spiritual, was defeated by a system that he believed he could manipulate. For the first time in recent memory, Formula One had lost a star. 6:40 p.m. The official time of death, according to Maggiore Hospital, was 2:17 p.m. local time. The precise instant of impact. Unfortunately, the heartbeat that was maintained during transport was only a flicker of technology, not hope. And we may have lost the best artist of his generation today. Senna died immediately from a massive skull fracture caused by the suspension arm going through his helmet during a high-speed crash. Max Mosley, the president of the FIA, later visited the scene of Ratzenberger's collision but skipped Senna's burial because he believed that Roland died trying to qualify. At the front of a race, Ayrton lost his life. We learned something from both. During his speech, race winner Michael Schumacher didn't seem to have much to say. There was no party, no champagne, and no cheers from the stage. It was a melancholy emotion rather than one of triumph. The silence made it obvious.